We've just turned the calendar to a new year. What better time to turn the page to a more fulfilling life? That's exactly the journey Beyond the Crucible is charted for you in our e-course, Discover Your Second Act Significance. The 3-module video course will equip you to transform your life from, is this all there is, to this is all I've ever wanted. Each session is led by Beyond the Crucible founder Warwick Fairfax, who shares his own hard-won successes in turning trials into triumphs. And he's got some high-powered help, from USA Today's gratitude guru to a runner-up on TV's Project Runway. It's an ensemble of men and women living significant second acts who would command a 6-figure price tag if any business wanted to fill an auditorium with them to coach their employees. But we've packed their insights and action steps into our course for a sliver of that cost. And if you act before the end of January, you'll get 23% off your enrollment. Just visit secondactsignificance.com and use the code 23 for 23. So don't delay. Enroll today. And remember, life's too short to live a life you don't love. Now, here's today's podcast episode. Welcome, everyone, to Beyond the Crucible, the podcast that dares to talk about setback and failure, but not so we can commiserate, so we can elevate. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host of the show, and our mission today is to offer you the hope that your crucible experiences, those tragedies and challenges you've faced or are facing, do not define you. They refine you. They did not happen to you, they happened for you. And no one I know knows that better than the host of Beyond the Crucible, the founder of Beyond the Crucible, and my friend, Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, we've got another, I say this all the time, I feel like a broken record, another fascinating guest with a fascinating story. And you guys have a little bit in common. So it'll be fun to sort of have this conversation unfurl as we go.
We do. Well said. Very much looking forward to it.
So our guest today is Bill Brown, and his first 10 years were spent outside of Detroit, and then he moved to Maryland near Washington, D.C. He attended Princeton University, where he received an engineering degree and rode on the crew team. Bill, you should know that when I was showing Warwick the bio, he was very impressed that you rode on the crew team. His first job was 2 years as a production supervisor for Procter & Gamble in a soap factory on Staten Island. He then got an MBA at Harvard Business School. There's the connection with Warwick, and also met his wife, Karen, there. He took a job in marketing with General Mills in Minnesota, where he worked for 6 years. He and Karen were married in 1988 and had 3 boys in the early 1990s. It was after their move to Minnesota when Karen and he took up cross-country skiing. Their boys joined in the fun, and they grew up and all became accomplished skiers. He skied his first ski marathon. I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but I'm going to try. The American Birkebeiner in 1989. He joined Toro in 1993 and was responsible for a number of businesses over the next 22 years, including the residential, landscape contractor, golf, and international businesses. The company was quite successful during that period of time. In 2015, he was one of 3 finalists for the CEO job. Great sense, Bill, great sense of tease there, because that story is going to get unpacked a little bit more as Warwick takes it over and starts asking you questions.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have you. And just to let listeners know, Bill and I were in the same class at Harvard Business School, the class of 1987. We had our reunion a few weeks ago in October. And the guy that headed up the reunion for our year, Dan McCarthy, he came up with this really good idea of a session for our class. There are other reunions going on, but for our class of 87 called Glimpses. And he wanted, I guess it ended up 4 of us, I think maybe, giving glimpses of grit and resilience. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the 4, and Bill was one of the 4 too. And so when I heard Bill's story, as we'll unpack, I thought, gosh, he would be a great guest on Beyond the Crucible. He's got a great story. So that's kind of where the idea came from, at least for me. So, Bill, again, thank you for coming on the podcast. As we often ask, what was life like for you growing up, and obviously Detroit, and then suburbs of DC? Kind of a little bit about your family and what you love to do, and I have a feeling, I don't know if marathoning was in there somewhere. You've always been an athlete, but what was life like for Bill kind of growing up?
Sure. Yeah. And first of all, just thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be part of this podcast. And I guess I grew up normal American lifestyle. I was actually an only child, so spent a lot of time with my parents. We did a lot of outdoor activities, whether it was canoeing or hiking or going to state parks, that sort of thing. I was athletic, but not very good. I enjoyed all types of sports. Ended up wrestling in high school, not with a lot of fame, but I was on the team. And it really wasn't until college that I got more into athletics seriously.
Wow. And so you went to Princeton, which is obviously very impressive. And rowing on the crew team, I mean, that's, I don't know if we talked about this, maybe we did or didn't, but rowing has always been my favorite sport. I rowed in high school for my private school in Sydney, and then rowed for my college at Oxford, which,
cool.
It's not quite, if you row for Oxford University, you're like Olympic level. They're seriously good. Like Princeton is seriously good. But I rowed for my college, which is somewhere between intramural and Oxford level. I mean, it's serious stuff, but I wasn't really that good per se. I rowed on the bow side for those, typically bow or seven, at least I think the terminology is different in America, so forgive me, but, for English and Australian listeners who row, they'll know what I mean. And maybe people who speak more than one crew language in America, maybe they'll understand. But anyway, I always loved it. But I think it was the lightweight crew at Princeton. I mean, that's seriously impressive. Did you row it? I don't know, the head of the Charles and Henley? Did you any of those sorts of things?
Actually, yeah, I was fortunate to do both. We'd do the head of the Charles every year. Wasn't that far away, and we'd take a number of boats up there. And my senior year, I was fortunate to make one of the two boats that went to Henley and raced in the Henley Royal Regatta over there. That was definitely a highlight. Yeah.
And just for listeners, Henley is one of the premier crew races in the world in England. So if Bill was at Henley, that means Bill was seriously good at rowing, just for listeners to know. A little color commentary there. But
so my last race in college was at Henley, and we were in a straight four, which means we didn't have a coxswain. And I was steering the boat, and we ended up crashing into the log boom. We were racing as Jesus College of Cambridge. So at Henley, if you lose by a lot, i.e. if you crash, they don't say how much you lose by, they just say easily. So in the records, it says Jesus College beats Princeton easily. I don't know if I would have wanted to beat Jesus anyhow. So
that's it. The headline writes itself, doesn't it, Gary? Jesus beats Princeton easily.
Yeah.
Kind of writes itself.
in very large type, you bet.
Never bet against Jesus. There you go. So that's too funny. So you graduated Princeton, and obviously went to Harvard Business School probably soon after, I'm guessing. And obviously we met there. We had different sections, but we met there. So talk about your kind of corporate career. It sounds like you worked your way up the ladder in Procter & Gamble, General Mills, Toro, premier brands. So just talk about those years, what you enjoyed, what was your path in the corporate arena.
Sure. So P&G was before business school. I took an engineering entry-level job. P&G is one of the few people that actually put graduating engineers right on the production line. So I was involved in supervising union employees, packaging Tide and other laundry granule soaps. And after a couple of years, decided that while the factory was an interesting place to work, I didn't want to spend my whole life there. So that's why I ended up going back to business school to get a better sense for the entire scope of business. But I like packaged goods, so I ended up taking a job with General Mills, which is one of the premier marketing companies, primarily in cereals and cake mixes and those type of products. And I worked there for 6 years in various roles. ended up as a marketing manager there. And then one day was talking to a executive recruiter, and he told me about an opportunity at Toro, and it sounded like a good company. And as an engineer, I get to work with a little bit more mechanical, technical products. So that appealed to me, and worked on lawn tractors, garden tractors, and then kind of the new business for us, landscape contractors. And kind of headed up that and grew that business for 7 years, and then got into the golf business and back to the residential business. So it's a good career, definitely.
That's awesome. So did you start off sort of in the brand management, marketing, product management side, and then production, or obviously eventually you grew into sort of general management over divisions and units? And
right. Yeah. So at General Mills, it was all product marketing and all the basics of marketing, and took 1 year out for sales. And then Toro, kind of the same thing, but then kind of broadened my responsibility to be more general management. But marketing was kind of the entry level, yes.
So as you were doing all this, I'm guessing you must love marketing, branding and general management. What is it you really loved about what you did in your career during those days? General Mills, Toro, working up to be a senior manager there. What did you love about the job?
Well, marketing, you get to spend time with the customers, understanding what they really want. And so at both companies, were very focused on new product development and coming up with new to the world products, or just improving their products altogether to be the leaders in the marketplace. So as a result, marketing spent a lot of time, as I say, with customers, understanding, their likes, their dislikes. Understanding likes and dislikes is quite different for a food product than it is for a lawnmower. But the same basic ideas. And, so at Toro, we would spend a lot of time actually watching the customers use the product and understand, what was easy, what was hard about the job they were doing. And as we got into landscape contractor business, I kind of got all our group to spend time on the mowers with contractors, actually cutting people's grass and, emptying bags of leaves and doing whatever the contractor had to do, so that we were walking in their shoes. And so you really get to understand kind of what they go through. And then what was rewarding was with some of the products we came up with, that we made the jobs easier for our customers. And so they had a real affinity with the product. And, it was pretty cool when you go out and see a crew with all of your product on their trailer, and kind of they got into the product. And there was something special about the bond between the customer and the product, because these were professionals, and that's how they made their living, using, our machines. So it was definitely a good feedback reward mechanism for that.
It's probably different than a General Mills, where it's a little harder to talk to a whole bunch of customers since it's consumer, and it's just, what do you do? I guess you can do focus groups and get,
a lot of focus groups behind the mirrors. Yeah. As people were tasting the product and what they liked and what they didn't like.
But with, contractors, they can tell you, this is what works. Maybe it's a little cumbersome to get, the back off to empty the leaves, or maybe the turning radius isn't what I want, or whatever it is. There's probably lots of little things that they'd say, I love it, but, there's 10% here I'd love you to improve. And gosh, how can we improve that 10%? And, all of that stuff, right? Trying to make something that's great even greater, which is
right. And contractors aren't bashful. I mean, they'll tell you what's working and what's not working. So,
right. So, so it sounds like that was going great, and you came to a point in 2015 where you were one of 3 finalists. Which, if you're in a company that you love, which sure sounds like you love Toro, it's like this is sort of the pinnacle of your career. When you go to Harvard Business School, you're thinking, I'd love to either own a business or be the CEO of a business. That's the point of why you go there, right? That's the objective ultimately. I mean, some people stay in consulting and investment banking, but certainly for many, it's being a CEO or an owner of the business. So you were one of the 3 finalists. Super exciting, and just to be in the mix, you probably felt honored, the fact that you're one of 3. But yet it was a bittersweet moment. In one sense, you were honored, but yet you found out some news that obviously changed your life. So just talk about that moment, or those moments in 2015, and that it really shifted your whole life.
Sure, sure. Well, actually, I was cross country skiing doing the American Birkebeiner in February, and I was about at maybe 44 kilometers into the race, and I just felt something strange in my leg, and I'd never felt it before, and I didn't kind of have the power that I normally did, and it eventually went away, but then it came back a few days later when I was exercising, and it would come and go, and so I ended up going in to get it checked out and saw a neurologist and came back with a diagnosis that I had Parkinson's disease. So that obviously changed things a bit. My father had Parkinson's, so I had one example at least of what that meant in his situation. And he was a good role model and kind of how to live with that. But obviously that did kind of change things both at work and on the home front.
And one of the things that you said to me when we talked before this interview, Bill, I found fascinating. And I didn't know what you just said now about you were, in a race and you were skiing, your leg felt kind of off, and then you exercised later and it felt kind of off. But you told me when we talked before that as you awaited the diagnosis, you actually feared it was going to be worse. In other words, when you finally were told you had Parkinson's, it was certainly not happy, joyful news necessarily, but it wasn't as bad as you thought it could be. Was that because you had a perspective of what it meant for your dad, and you weren't sort of blind as to what living with Parkinson's was? But that's just interesting to me that you were almost relieved that it was quote unquote just Parkinson's.
Yeah, my grandmother had passed away from ALS. And so I was actually kind of fearful that that's what it was. And, Parkinson's, while it's not a great diagnosis, Parkinson's doesn't kill you. It affects your quality of life. And, everybody has a different trajectory. It can get pretty ugly. But at the same time, yes, I had seen my dad go through it. And while it wasn't easy, he still lived a rich life for another 15 years after that. So, that example of how he had lived through that was kind of reassuring to me.
Wow. So in a sense, you were thinking, because I guess ALS is hereditary, isn't it?
It can be, yes.
Okay. What about, just out of curiosity, because listeners are probably wondering, because I've heard sometimes Parkinson's can be environmental, and it's just hard to know, but can it also be hereditary, or do we not really know?
It can be. About 10% of the cases tend to be hereditary. And
Okay.
I've been tested for the what causes the hereditary aspect of it, and at least I don't have that for what they tested.
Okay.
But the fact that my father had it and I had it, there's got to be something going on there.
And obviously, you have 3 boys, so you're wondering, well, what does that mean for my boys? And they're probably healthy at the moment. It's probably unknowable as to,
That's right.
that whole
Yeah.
kind of thing.
But they're doing some amazing research right now, and one of the things they're working on is trying to predict it, because the earlier you can catch something like that, the better off you are. Yes.
Did they catch yours fairly early, or?
Yeah, most people who get it tend to be in their 60s, 70s, 80s.
Sure.
The percentage of people who get it as they get older gets higher.
Right.
And part of that is because what happens is you don't have as much dopamine in the brain, which kind of allows the neurotransmission between the synapses of the brain. And so we naturally lose dopamine as we get older. And, I've read someplace if we all live to be 120, almost everybody would get Parkinson's. And
Wow.
And I don't know if that's correct or not, but it kind of conceptually makes sense. And so most people don't get it as young as I did. But some people, like Michael J. Fox, get it much earlier and end up living with it, for 30 or 40 years.
Wow. So how old were you when you got it?
I was 54.
Wow. So talk about that time, because right as you got diagnosed, that happened to be at the same time, I think, that you were in the running, one of 3 candidates for the CEO of Toro. So just talk about that whole moment, because you had to make some decisions, at least I think you felt you had. So just talk about that whole period.
So Karen, my wife, and I had, we had told close family and a few friends, but not that many people. And it was time to do the one-on-one interviews with the board of of the Toro company, kind of talk about what my vision would be if I were to become a CEO and kind of what I'd try to accomplish with the company. And I couldn't, with good conscience, have those discussions without letting them know that I had Parkinson's. My neurologist had said, if I wanted to go after the CEO job, that would be fine. I could do it, just to be aware that stress does make the symptoms more severe. It doesn't make the disease progress any faster. It just kind of makes the symptoms a little bit more standoutish, if you will. And so I ended up talking to the CEO and told him what the diagnosis was. And he was very understanding. And we had a long talk. And at the end of it, he said, if you want to continue to go after the CEO job, I'll support you for that. If you want to decide that you don't want to go after and just continue to work here, that'd be fine too. It's your decision to make. And so Karen and I spent a lot of time over the weekend talking about it, praying about it, thinking about it. In the end, we decided that I would take my name out of the running. It was just, I'd had a great career. We had a great family, still had a lot of years ahead of us. And it wasn't affecting me that much at the time. So we figured, let's enjoy our life together and do some other things besides work. And I ended up working for about another 3.5, 4 years after that point. But looking back on it, it was definitely a good decision not to become the CEO, just seeing how things have progressed.
I think you've talked about it a bit or implied a bit. Talk about the thinking behind it, why you made that decision. Because you probably don't know. Do you think you would have had a real shot of being the CEO with, let's say Parkinson's didn't happen? Do you think you would have had a pretty good shot?
That's a gret question. People have asked me that before at the business school reunion. That's what everybody wanted to know. I don't know. Obviously, I thought I had a good shot at it. The other two candidates were very strong also. And the guy who got it's done a great job. And I've supported him since day one when he got it. So that's one of those great unknowns.
But yeah, just so talk about just your thinking behind it, because that had to have been a very tough decision. Obviously, you and Karen prayed about it, but I think you've kind of answered it. But just another beat or two on this. What made you decide to drop out, would you say?
Sure. Just knowing that stress impacted the symptoms. And I was, I had some symptoms, not that many, but I was getting a little bit of a tremor in one of my hands. And I had already noticed that, like, if I had to make a presentation or something and I tried to stick my hand in my pocket, it would shake more and those kind of things. And, I knew that things wouldn't get better. The goal is to maintain as long as you can instead of getting worse. And so I knew, having watched the CEO who was there and his predecessor, I just knew how the demands of the job were so great. And I think I worked for the then CEO for about 12 straight years. So I kind of got a good insight as to what it took. And we had been, the three of the final candidates, we'd been working with some development coaches, kind of on, thinking through what it meant to be the CEO and what you'd have to do. And, the message kept coming back, this is a hard job. And you don't sign up for this job unless you're 100% in, no questions, if, ands, or buts about it. And I just knew, with having to deal with Parkinson's and having watched what my dad went through, I could do it, but would it be enjoyable with the Parkinson's kind of with me? Maybe not quite as much so. If you're going to put that much effort into a job, you better enjoy it and not be worrying about, oh no, you're the spokesman for the company. And, I envision myself, up on stage talking to, the top customers, and, the leader has to be strong. And you can still be strong when you have Parkinson's, but you don't appear to be, quote, normal. And that just, I didn't want to do that to myself. I didn't want to do that to the company either. So that was probably.
And you're probably thinking, can I really be 100% in? I mean, it's going to be hard, because I'm 100% of who I am, but with Parkinson's, to be 100% in is going to take a toll. It's going to take a toll on me and my health, on my family. When they said you got to be 100%, it's like, can I really be that? And do I want to be that? Given, the effect it'll have on me and my family. Is the cost is going to be high anyway, but the cost is going to be exponentially higher than it would have been without this diagnosis, if that makes sense.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think you summed that up well.
So obviously it had to have been Parkinson's. I don't know if it was better or not better for you because you had a model of somebody that was, and your dad, relatively functional for quite a lot of years, but it had to have been gut-wrenching. I mean, do you kind of look back on the person that was the CEO and has probably taken them from strength to strength and think, that could have been me. That could have been me running Toro, and I would have done A, B, and C, maybe not better, maybe indifferent. Do you look back wistfully at times and think, that really could have been me. I could have been that guy who ran Toro.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say I haven't thought about that over time. But I haven't thought that I would have done things differently. I think what by and large, the current CEO has done a very good job directing the company. I think we would have done a lot of similar things. And they haven't done anything crazy that, at least in my eyes, they've kind of kept going by focusing on what had made the company successful in the past. So yeah, when, I hear people talking about CEOs, I think, oh yeah, that could have been me, but I haven't spent a lot of time kind of saying, oh, I wish I could have been. It's just kind of more matter of fact. Yeah.
So it's not like, gosh, I missed out on a whole lot of fun and gosh, that would have been cool. It sounds like you don't overdwell on it. Like, gosh, I would have liked to be the guy in charge. That would have been so fun.
I don't think that nothing comes from that. And, it's kind of how, and I'm sure we'll get into it, how do I deal with Parkinson's? You can't think that often about, what could have been. It's because this is what it is. And you got to move forward every day. And so that's kind of my approach.
So before we talk about how you move forward, because, we always ask this on Beyond the Crucible, when you got the diagnosis, you made that decision to pull out of the running for CEO. In those weeks and months, what were you feeling? I mean, how were you doing? I mean, there's a physical thing, which you were, but just emotionally, spiritually, how were you doing in those first weeks and months after the diagnosis and the decision to bow out of the running of CEO of Toro?
That's a good question. I guess a few thoughts come to mind. When I was a little nervous, what would the future bring? Because part of, I think most of us, when we get some sort of diagnosis like that, we read a lot, we research a lot. And, so you read about all the bad stuff that can happen to you.
Right.
Which isn't the greatest upper in the world. And, one of the craziest things about Parkinson's is there can be 50, 75 different symptoms and how it affects people. And if you line up 50 people with Parkinson's, you get 50 different cases. I mean, there's a lot of commonality. But I get together with a few friends that have Parkinson's, and, we compare notes, and, there's a few things that one guy has that nobody else has. And you kind of shake your head going, what a weird disease. But so you end up reading about all the stuff that can go bad. And so, there's that nervousness about, where's mine going to go? What's it going to lead to? Okay, I'm 3 months into this. Am I going to have it for 40 years? Will I be able to walk? Will I be able to talk? What are all those kind of things? And you think about what kind of impact will that have on your spouse, your children, maybe grandchildren someday. So there's definitely an uneasiness. At the same time, kind of thinking about, okay, what do I do to minimize the effects of it as much as possible? So I changed my diet a fair amount, started taking some certain supplements that our research kind of came up with. My wife's very much into vitamins and supplements. This is her sister who's an MD. So they were kind of my research team. And so a fair amount of work there, changing that. And then exercise is probably the most important thing you can do. So, kind of continuing on with that, I didn't really have to do that much differently, but a few things here and there.
What's interesting is you're talking, Bill, one of the things we talk about at Beyond the Crucible is when you get whether it's health diagnosis or physical tragedy or get fired, you have a choice. You can hide under the covers and be angry and bitter and saying, this is so not fair, and be angry at, God, the universe, friends, family, it depends on the crucible, and just say, you know what, I'm just going to be bitter and angry for the next 30, 40, 50 years, and eventually life does have an end date for all of us. And that's a choice. That's an approach. But it sure sounds like you didn't take that and said, look, I wish this didn't happen. This is awful. But it didn't sound like you wallowed in self-pity for months or years. I mean, were you nervous, anxious? Absolutely. But it sounded like you say, this sucks. This is not good, but we'll find a way forward. I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to eat right, exercise, and find a way to have purpose. It sounds like there wasn't a lot of anger, wallowing, pounding fists against the wall, yelling, screaming, this is not fair and I'm going to be angry and bitter for the next 30 years. It sounds like you really didn't, I'm not saying you were happy, but it sounds like you didn't have years of anger and rage that paralyzed you.
That's definitely correct. When I got the diagnosis, I came home, my wife Karen said, we'll make it together through this. And that meant a lot. Having my dad as an example definitely helped. I didn't hear him complaining at all. He'd make fun of things that, when he's played golf and his backswing would go back and everything would shake, and, then somebody hits the ball, and he kind of got a kick out of that. I never, I know a lot of people kind of question God when things happen to them, and I've never done that. I think I guess I'm somewhat blessed that, I didn't have those type of feelings. Like you say, you wish it didn't happen to you. But I guess kind of the way I'm wired, and, you talk about authenticity a lot. And I think that's understanding who you are. And I'm going to try to figure out how to make the best out of a situation and move forward, because there's a lot of exciting things you can do in life. And I wasn't going to hide under the covers.
That's, needless to say, that is unbelievably impressive, because I'm sure not everybody, frankly, that goes through Parkinson's or any tragedy approaches it that way, because it's just not easy. So you've hinted at it a bit, but just listeners are probably going to be curious. So how was he able to get through that with such a remarkably good attitude and let's move forward, let's eat right, let's exercise, let's find things to do with purpose? What are some of the things, whether it's your wiring or your beliefs, what were some of those elements that led you to be able to move forward in the way that you have? What's part of your wiring or belief system that's enabled you to do that, would you say?
Sure. Well, I guess, first of all, being a Christian and and been a Christian my whole life, I think I have a strong faith, belief in God, and the fact that, He doesn't love me any different because I've got Parkinson's. I don't have Parkinson's. I'm created in His image. And, so I've got a strong sense of self, but being, humble at the same time, kind of understanding that, it's not me who kind of creates everything. It's God pushing me in a certain direction. And so that's probably first and foremost. My parents were real can-do people. From a young age, it was kind of always a focus on, what can you do? How do you make things better? How do you finish something? How do you get stuff done? And as I say, my dad is an example with having Parkinson's, just kind of looking at it in as positive light as possible. So I think those are probably the key elements of it.
Yeah, so it's so important. I want listeners to understand. I mean, obviously, people listening to this podcast know that I have a similar faith in Christ that was certainly helpful to me in the 90s as I was, trying to bounce back from losing a $2.25 billion, 150-year-old family business, which very different crucible. But just as an aside, I remember one of the first folks we had on the podcast, David Charbonnet, he, like his dad, was a Navy SEAL, and he was paralyzed in a training accident, parachuting accident. And his dad said that, my son was as good a Navy SEAL as is out there, which you don't say in the in the Navy SEAL community unless it's true. And I said to him, look, I'm almost apologize for what I went through because it's nothing compared to what you went through, I said to David. And he said something very profound. He said, you know what, Warwick, your worst day is your worst day. It's not a competition to see who can have the worst day, right? It'd be like you saying to somebody who has ALS, gosh, what I'm going through is nothing compared to what, or somebody could say, what I'm going through is nothing compared to what you're going through, Bill, with, Parkinson. It's not a competition to who has the worst disease, the worst business failure, the worst, which was very helpful to me. So obviously your faith was important, and it sure sounds like the unconditional love of your wife, your kids, your parents. Not everybody would have reacted the way your wife Karen did. Some people, when tragedy comes, it's hard to believe, but they leave. You probably, and I don't need to know examples, but I'm sure you probably know folks that the spouse says, look, I'm sorry, I didn't sign up for this. I'm very sorry, but I'm done. Mm-hmm. Your wife wasn't like that, obviously a person of faith. So that can't be underrated, is the unconditional love and support of family. That clearly was huge for you, correct?
Definitely, right. Yeah, the entire family, both from parents, spouse, children, kind of all supportive, definitely meant a lot. And that is part of what kind of makes days easier when kind of everybody's on your side, if you will, supporting you. And friends also. Some of our closest friends are people we go to church with and have been together with for a long time. And, they continue to be supportive and continue to be friends and friends from work and whatnot. It was one of the neat things about going back to our business school reunion, just seeing a lot of friends who, they don't care if you have Parkinson's or if you've lost a company. They like you for who you are and are good friends, and that's important.
And that's really, what you just said is important, because I don't know about you, but we can get in our own heads, at least certainly I can, and I actually talked about that, is you might think, oh, gee, I have Parkinson's. Maybe sometimes people feel uncomfortable being around people with a chronic illness because it makes them think of their own mortality. And so they would just rather shun you and just walk across the other side of the street like you're a leper or something. And there are people out there like that. You probably have met those people and know those people who were friends and acquaintances, let's say, and aren't so much anymore. It just feels uncomfortable. They don't want to talk about it. And certainly for me, as I mentioned at the Harvard Business School reunion, because of this cataclysmic loss, for whatever reason, I felt for at least the first 2 or 3 reunions, like I just didn't feel like I could go, because I felt like people would judge me and, gosh, how could you be so stupid? Didn't you pay attention in class and launch this $1 billion takeover? I made so many dumb decisions like, gee, the rest of my family who were in the business is going to want to be trapped in a private company controlled by a 26-year-old. Hello. If you read any case like that, you'd say the guy's an idiot. Everybody in a 90+ section would say this makes no sense. Nobody will stay an investor in that. So I did a lot of self-persecution, self-flagellation. But you're right. When I mentioned that at the recent reunion, we're all about the same age, late 50s, early 60s. Nobody was judging me. Quite the reverse. They had compassion and empathy. It's like, that in your head, but sometimes in your heart, you just don't know. And it's very different, you and me, but does that make sense? It's like, not everybody would have known you had Parkinson's. You probably hadn't seen some folks for years, but nobody was like, oh, I better stay away from Bill. They were like, I'm sure they admired your courage for sharing what you did, right?
Right. Yeah. And just, being with old friends who kind of accept you for who you are definitely means a lot when you're going through something like this. And as you said, that, it's just the support from family and friends is so important for any of these kind of crucible examples that we all deal with. And if I had to deal with them all by myself, it'd probably be a different person.
So let's pivot a bit to talk about, pain for a purpose. And this gets back to something we haven't talked a whole lot about, but when you moved to Minnesota, I guess originally with General Mills, and obviously in Minnesota, probably like Wisconsin, I'm guessing, there's a lot of cross-country skiing. Where I live in Maryland, not so much because there's not a whole lot of snow. So you'd be hard-pressed to make a career or even a recreational enjoyment of cross-country skiing. But you've been doing this for many years. Your boys do it, from what I understand. Wasn't one or two of them in the Olympics in biathlon or something? I mean, that's seriously impressive. That's not recreational cross-country skiing. That's like the elite of the elite. So just talk about both how you got into it and then how you used that passion for cross-country skiing to really help make a difference for Parkinson's. Because that's, I think, a fascinating story in of itself, your whole passion for cross-country skiing.
Yeah, growing up in Maryland, as you know, there's not too much snow, so I never skied growing up. I skied downhill a couple times up in New York with my uncle, but that was it.
And as you put it, explain to us again what the downhill is called, because you told that at the reunion.
We call that gravity-assisted skiing.
Yeah. That's the easy stuff, right? You just point the skis downhill.
We go up the hills and down the hills. Okay,
so just for listeners, real skiers ski cross country. The ones that can't quite make that do the easy stuff and do the gravity assisted one. Just little informational moment here from Beyond the Crucible. So there you go. Anyway, but back to cross country skiing.
Right. So when I moved to Minnesota, I was running marathons. And I had just run the Twin Cities Marathon in the fall of '87. And my boss at General Mills said, "What are you going to do in the winter?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to train for marathons." She goes, "Bill, this is Minnesota. You can't run in the winter here. Everything's icy and it's cold and it's slippery and it's dark." And she said, "You should take up cross-country skiing." And she had taken a class through the American Lung Association where they kind of help teach you how to ski and prepare to do a ski marathon. I didn't even know there were such things as ski marathons. And so I signed up and learned how to ski that year. And at the end of the winter, did a full 50-kilometer race up in Bemidji, Minnesota, which is up in the northwest part of the state. I came in near last in the race, fell about 50 times, got lapped by the winners. And it was truly a humiliating experience, but I was hooked. And I'm like, I'm gonna get better at this, and because there were moments that were enjoyable, and but the next day I was so sore because I'd never fallen on so many different parts of my body in one event, and but stuck with it, and actually got decent over the years. And as you mentioned, all of our family got into it. Karen skied the Birkebeiner a number of times. All the boys have skied it a bunch of times.
And that's where in Wisconsin is that? Because Gary is also in Wisconsin. Is it like northern Wisconsin? Or
it's northwest Wisconsin, yes. It goes from Cable to Hayward.
So that's like kitty corner from me because I'm southeast. So it's...
Yeah, different part. Wisconsin's a big state. It's probably from where he is to where the race is about a 6-7 hour drive. It's way up there. So when I got into skiing, we went to a camp once put on by a local ski club, and a gal gave a presentation on skiing the Vasaloppet in Sweden, which is a 90-kilometer race. And she started in the morning and started in the dark and ended in the dark. And my wife, Karen, said, "Why would anybody want to do that?" And I kind of secretly wanted to do that, and because it sounded pretty cool. And so as the years went on, I did get an opportunity to ski a couple international races. And there's 20 races in the series called the World Loppet. Loppet is the Swedish and Norwegian word for race. So these races are all Loppets. And so 20 countries have a race, the kind of the biggest race in each of the country, and they kind of come together for marketing purposes. And so I did a race in Poland. I did the Vasaloppet. And so I had done 3 of them when I was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so I kind of determined that I kind of needed to get my schedule going a little bit faster here if I was going to finish these races, because I had the goal to do all 20. And I discovered that no American had done all 20 before. So I said that's going to be my goal. And at the same time, I was kind of looking around to figure out what I could do for the Parkinson's community. My father had been involved in some studies, some medical studies, and I had done the MS 150 a couple of times, which is a 150-mile bike ride from Duluth to St. Paul, raising money for MS. And that's a big corporate event here in the Twin Cities. And I looked around to try to find something like that for Parkinson's. I couldn't find it. There were a lot of fundraisers, and some of them, they'd hike a mountain or they'd make pancakes or stuff like that. All good stuff. But there's nothing quite combining cross-country skiing and Parkinson's research fundraising. And so in kind of looking around, we discovered that the Michael J. Fox Foundation, which is the premier funder of Parkinson's research, had kind of a backroom engine for fundraising, and you could create your own event. So I decided to create what I called Ski for Parkinson's. And so the idea was much like when people run for a cure or do their March of Dimes walk kind of deal, that I do these marathon races and get people to sponsor me. And so did the first one in 2016 and was just humbled by the response, by how much people donated on my behalf. And it was truly inspiring. And so as the years, we've done it for 7 years now, and I'm up to 6 people are doing it. And it's not a big community. We're small, but we're powerful. And we've raised about $575,000 over that period of time, which is pretty good for a small group of skiers. And each year we pick up like one new skier, and I've got one new person who's joining me next year or this year coming up.
Now, on your team, do they all have Parkinson's on your team, or
no? So
okay.
3 of us have Parkinson's.
Okay.
One was actually the boys' ski coach in high school, and then one had a sister who had it.
Okay.
And then another one had a father who had it. And the guy who's agreed to sign up for this year is a good friend of mine who's done a few of the World Local races with me.
Wow. So that's staggering that, and just help us understand. So I tried to look it up, but the World Loppet courses, they vary, right? What's the shortest and the longest course of the 20?
Well, the shortest is in Australia. Which is,
there you go. We like to make things easy in Australia, right?
Right. You don't want to have to spend too much time on the course before you get a beer.
Well, I was just going to say that. Off to get the Foster's Lager after that.
Why do we all think of beer when we hear Australia?
Well, because it's true. Aussies like drinking beer. But so how short is it?
42 kilometers is the shortest. So that's 26 miles. That's a true marathon.
Right. So maybe that's because they couldn't find more than 42 kilometers of snow to race on, because it's a pretty hot country. But What's the longest one?
Longest is 90 kilometers in Sweden. That's the granddaddy of them all, the Vasaloppet.
Yeah, plenty of snow there.
Plenty of snow. And the crazy thing about that race is it's got 17,000 people in it. And everybody starts at exactly the same time. You tell me how you get 17,000 people going down a ski trail at the same time. It's like the definition of a bottleneck.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of thinking of the 20 you've done, what is the most fun, interesting, challenging, would you say is the most memorable of the 20 that you've done?
Oh, wow. They're all memorable in their own way. The one I've enjoyed the most was the Marcialonga in Italy. It's 70 kilometers up in the Dolomites. It's just absolutely beautiful. And they put snow down the roads and little towns, and people come out and cheer for you. That was fantastic. The New Zealand race is spectacular just in the topography.
Right.
It's kind of almost like this another world kind of scenery. Iceland's pretty cool too, because it's way up in the middle of nowhere and just spectacular. You almost feel like you're on the lunar surface there too.
Mm.
Wow. So this is kind of amazing. I mean, to ski, 42 plus miles, as you said, 42 plus kilometers, 26 plus miles. I mean, for people that don't have Parkinson's would be tough. But somebody with Parkinson's, when it saps your energy. And I remember one of the things you wrote somewhere is you had to deal with the fact that I believe there was some who you could lap easily, or at least they'd never catch you, and yet they would catch you. So you had to deal with the fact that I can't do this as well as I used to, right? So that's one of the things you had to come to terms with.
Yeah. I mean, I was never winning the races, but I was one of the faster people. Like you say, you think, we all think we're faster than we are as we get older. And that's even without Parkinson's. And you kind of look at somebody next to you on the course and go, I should be able to beat that person. And you can't anymore. And so it's kind of humbling yourself a little bit. But also the perspective changes as to kind of why you're out there. And it's not just trying to beat people. It's kind of enjoying the whole experience a lot more.
So talk about what you do now with, raising money for Parkinson's and just cross-country skiing. And, we often talk about paying for a purpose. How would you say, nobody wants Parkinson's or any disease or any crucible, but talk about like the purpose that's come from that, and how do you view what you've been through now, and the purpose that's come out of it. And we've even had some guests, I'm not saying you should say this, that have found some blessing, some hope, even some gain out of loss. In fact, we had a recent series that we've done. So yeah, talk about any of that, just the purpose that came out of what you've been through and what you do now.
Sure. Yeah. That's a great question, because there's no question I am who I am in part because I have Parkinson's, and that has changed me. And while physically it hasn't changed me for the better, there's other aspects that I think I'm probably better at. Probably being more empathetic, probably more patient, probably more caring. It's, as you say, it's not something you wished or that I wished had happened, but it has. And so you figure out, okay, how does that make me better in certain ways? And I think it has. With that said, I still wish I didn't have it. It's the purpose. As I cross country ski and I train for it, and I think about it and I race. It's not just me that I'm skiing for now. It's everybody who has Parkinson's, because we're raising money. I've been surprised by the number of people who either have Parkinson's or even who don't have Parkinson's, who say that, hearing about me ski or watching it is an inspiration. And, I get it. I find it a little hard to believe at the same time. I don't want it to go to my head. But I think there are people who honestly do get inspired when they hear somebody who's got Parkinson's goes and does 17 World Lopet races around the globe. And, so if I can be that example of some hope or inspiration for some people, then that's definitely a positive, and I've benefited from that. And, I do think about that a lot when I'm out there on skis. It used to be just thinking about how do I get faster, probably more on the selfish side of things. About me. And now it's more about thinking about people who are supporting me, people, who have Parkinson's, and hopefully that we can work towards getting a cure.
I'm glad you brought up what you think about when you ski, because you said something else about your thoughts when we talked earlier. You said that you don't go 2 minutes in your life day to day without thinking about Parkinson's. And I'm betting that those aren't even predominantly, let alone all, quote unquote, negative thoughts. In other words, what you just talked about being seen as an inspiration for people, about, I may be a little slower, but I can still do this, about about not giving up, about not lying in bed with the covers over your head. When you think about Parkinson's in those every 2 minutes, because it does affect every kind of movement you do, it affects you in a lot of ways. But I hazard a very strong guess that these aren't negative thoughts. You're not, oh, woe is me, when you think about that the majority of the time, right?
Yeah, it's not woe is me. They're not always positive thoughts.
Right.
It's I'd say it's more matter of fact. Sometimes I'm like, I kind of yell at my muscles, like, don't do that. But I'm not thinking like, oh man, why am I the one who's got a leg that does that?
Right.
But I kind of yell at body parts to do certain things from time to time. But yeah, other times it is kind of, okay, how can I, with this, get this done and still be successful in what I'm trying to accomplish? And, it's different for different situations. When I'm doing something that I enjoy, I'm probably more positive about it. So when I'm out skiing, I kind of take it more as a challenge. When it's something like tying my shoes, it's not quite as fun, and maybe I get a little bit more upset at my fingers for not working right.
Yeah, I hear that. It's obviously got to be incredibly frustrating to do the things that was so simple now seem so hard at times. But yeah, what you said about other people finding you an inspiration, that might be a weird thing to kind of digest because, you're a humble person of faith. You don't necessarily like to think of yourself as a hero or a role model or an inspiration. It's like, almost biblically, apostles would just, tear off their, that like tear their robes and, no, don't worship me and, all that kind of thing. So I get that. But still, you do so much. Yes, raising, $575,000 over a number of years is unbelievably impressive. But I'd say just as impressive is the role model you give people with Parkinson's, people with disabilities, people with challenges, in that, Parkinson's doesn't have to be a death sentence, doesn't have to be the end of your life. You can still do productive things. What you're doing is offering people hope. So maybe there's somebody that's just being diagnosed with Parkinson's or ALS or whatever it is. And I realize ALS is very different. And I don't know if it's worse or better, very different. But it's like hope is often huge. So somebody might say, why bother eating right? Why bother exercising? I'm done. There might be some people who've newly diagnosed with Parkinson's might have that attitude. And it's like, you know what? If Bill can do this, maybe I do need to eat right. Maybe I do need to exercise. Giving people that motivation can make a massive difference, as you know, much better than I do, in their quality of life. So hope can have massive ramifications. So, I wouldn't say it's much more, but in one sense, it's definitely more than just raising money. You're providing hope that has tangible benefits to other people with Parkinson's and other people in general. And you're just being you, but you being you has a massive positive effect on people. Does that make sense?
And that is, let me just jump in as the advocate for the listener here. It's not just about people who have had a quote unquote disease, right? The way you're describing how you're walking through life with Parkinson's is the way that we all can orient ourselves to walk through life with whatever, fill in the blank for what your crucible is. This idea that it's not the end of your story. We say it all the time. It's not the end of your story. If you learn the lessons from it and you apply it moving forward, that's a key part. Moving forward, it can be the best story of your life and you can do some great things. We would not have this podcast. Beyond the Crucible wouldn't exist if Warwick didn't go through his crucible. Mm-hmm. Your work to benefit Parkinson's research, that wouldn't have happened without your diagnosis. So some gain can indeed come from loss. And your story, what you just described, is not just for people who have physical limitations or who have physical crucibles. It's for anybody who's gone through a difficult time, lost a job, tough family situation. You're an inspiration, not to make you blush, because you said earlier that you don't like that necessarily, but you're an inspiration for anybody who's gone through a crucible, for the way that you've continued to not march forward, but ski forward, if you will.
Well, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. One of the things that Michael J. Fox talks about a lot is focus on what you can do, not on what you can't do. And I'm sure, there's a lot of people who think that way. But with he being who he is and what he's done for Parkinson's research, he's an important person in my life. And I think about that a lot. And I think that kind of gets at what both of you are talking about, is that, in any situation, no matter what challenge you have, whether it be, a loss or a disease or whatever the challenge is, there's always something we can do. And how do we harness the energy to take those steps to move forward? And, Warwick, you talked about, not staying under the covers. How do you get out of bed and say, okay, what can I do? What am I going to accomplish? And how do I kind of make the world a better place or make my life better? Or what can I do? And so much of it is up to us. If we focus on what we can do, I think it's a lot better life going forward.
That sound you just heard, listener, is the captain turning on the fasten seatbelt sign, indicating that we're beginning our descent to land the plane of the show. I was going to use some cute cross-country skiing metaphor, but frankly, I don't know any because I've never been cross-country skiing, so I didn't want to embarrass myself and try to do that. I've been on planes. I know what happens. Captain, turns on the fasten seatbelt sign, says it's about time to land. We're not going to land yet, though. Warwick's going to have another question or two, but Bill, I would be remiss if I did not give you the chance to let listeners know how they can find out more about what you do to raise money for Parkinson's. How can they find out more? Is there a website, someplace they can go to find out more?
Sure. Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. If you go to their website and go to Team Fox and then search on my name, you should be able to find what we're doing.
Great. Warwick, take us home.
Yeah, well, thank you, Bill, for being here. I was just so inspired by your talk at Harvard Business School and how you've just, really used your pain for a purpose. You haven't given up on life. You've still cross-country skied, raising money for Parkinson's, and just your attitude to life is an inspiration for so many. I love what you say. Focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. It's easy to look back and, for me, I don't know, 150-year-old family media business, what could have happened? And, all of the stupid mistakes I made. But it's not the same. But you can't look backwards. You can't change what happened. But, yeah, even for me, I think Crucibles can give you a degree of empathy and compassion, which I think it has for me. I'm less judgmental of people because, look, we all make big mistakes, bad things happen. And so what your attitude to life is such an inspiration. So many lessons, having a supportive family, having, values and beliefs can be huge. It can be a huge foundation. Having a supportive family, unconditional love is massive. So just thank you for what you're doing beyond just raising money for Parkinson's, which is huge, but continue to cross-country ski and living life, showing that, Parkinson's is not a death sentence, that when you go through tragedy, it doesn't have to be the end of your story. You can use it for a purpose. You can continue to live and be optimistic. And just by being you're an inspiration. You don't have to do anything other than be Bill Brown. And that's an inspiration to so many. So I guess maybe not so much a question than a commendation, or just there's a lot that we all can learn from you and how you live your life and your attitude to life. You may not think it's remarkable, but I think most of the rest of us think it's pretty remarkable. So you probably heard that before, but it is remarkable. There's a lot all of us can learn. As Gary rightly says, beyond just people that have Parkinson's, anybody that deals with tragedy, which is kind of most of us, and have had challenges in life, there's a lot we can learn from your attitude to life. It's truly inspiring.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thanks for the opportunity to be on this podcast.
Okay, I can do this. The plane's on the ground, but I also could say we crossed the finish line, because I think that's
where I thought you were going to go.
Yeah, well, there you go. Thank you for reinforcing my decision to say we've crossed the finish line. And listeners, what that means is that we have wrapped another episode of Beyond the Crucible. And until we meet next time, please remember this truth that we've unpacked here in our conversation with Bill Brown, and that is this. Crucibles are difficult. They're tough. They're hard. They can be things that you think about a lot, right? Bill says he doesn't go 2 minutes without thinking about his Parkinson's. Sometimes they can be good thoughts. Sometimes they can be not so good thoughts. So we know it's difficult. We know it's hard, but we also know through the experience that we've had, through the experience Bill has had, and through the experience all the guests that we've talked to on the show, now in its 140-something episode, we know that those bad experiences, those traumas, tragedies, setbacks, failures do not have to be the end of your story. They can, in fact, be the beginning of a new story. If you learn the lessons of your crucible, you apply those lessons, and you keep doing exactly what Bill has done. Keep moving forward. Maybe you're not going to ski forward. Maybe you're not a skier, but keep moving forward. If you do that and you dedicate yourself to a life of significance, the next act, the next story that you live out will be the most rewarding one yet, because where it ends is at that life of significance.